Hi everybody. Today is Friday, May 9th, 2025, and our friend Pepe Escobar is back with us. He's right now in Moscow. Welcome back, Pepe.
Welcome, Nima. Welcome, all of you. I barely made it. I told Nima I arrived 5 minutes ago because everything is still paralyzed in Moscow. So I had to walk. And I was on the other side of the bridge. So I had to walk a lot to be here on time to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you. Pepe, first of all, today is a very important day for Russia, and what's going on there that you mentioned is so much important for the history, for the time, for the current time that we are living through. How how did you find today and the parade that they had in Moscow?
Wow, Nima and all of you, this is one of those days that stays with you forever. I had to be here. It was a very complex operation. I told Nima I was in Iran. In fact, the day I flew from Iran to Moscow, I was in the Caspian Sea. So I had to come back from the Caspian Sea to Tehran. I arrived at 2 or 3 in the morning, and at 4 in the morning, I was in the airport. And our flight was late 1 hour, and I was with a Russian friend, and we were biting our nails. They said, "What if they close airspace again? We're going to be stranded here forever," because they had closed the airspace the day before, but in St. Petersburg, because of a possible drone attack. But in the end, in our case, was only 1 hour. So we arrived in Moscow yesterday morning. So I hit the streets immediately, and I had to come here. I'm in the middle of an extraordinary trip in Iran, which I plan to discuss with Nima and with all of you. But I had to be here because this is arguably the most important day for Russia in the 21st century. And it's as it is overloaded with all sorts of meanings, not only because of the 80th anniversary of the defeat of fascism and Nazism, which was basically mostly operated by the Red Army, whatever the fragmented, collected imbeciles, no? Collective West may say. If it was not for the Red Army, we know where we would be now, in the middle of the Third Reich. So they mostly fought the Third Reich 80 years ago. And the parallels could not be more graphic. And we could see among some of the guests of Russia, of President Putin, today in the square, only what, 1 hour, 2 hours ago, that they understood the significance of the moment, of the historical moment, and of the fact that they had to be here on this day. Some of them particularly impressed me. Canel from Cuba, Maduro from Venezuela, the Vietnamese prime minister, and last but not least, I would say the African nowadays as a progressive leader and the future of Africa, Captain Ibrahim Traore from Burkina Faso. His face, Nima, when in the middle of there were some shots of him watching the parade. He was like in awe. You could see that he was, wow, he's a military man. So he was observing Russian precision in action. The Russians don't put on a show. In fact, the show is how precise and how competent they are. The whole thing, how they choreographed the parade, taking in consideration the solemn, very solemn occasion, but at the same time, showing how immensely competent they are in military matters and in organizational terms when they apply themselves to it. Of course, Russia can be very messy as well. And The global south was in the square. Maybe we can all agree that the most important element in terms of geopolitics was the global south was fully represented in the square today, all continents, and majorities and minorities in all continents. And of course, side by side, the leaders of the world that is being forged now, the multipolar, multinodal world, sitting side by side. Xi Jinping was sitting to the right of Vladimir Putin. To the left, there were some some Central Asians. As far as I can remember, to the left of Putin was the president of Tajikistan and the other Central Asian nations. Um, Fascinating detail. Xi Jinping had a special Russian translator that was translating only to him from Russian to Mandarin, especially details and when Putin had some observations. So the measure of respect is off the charts, right? And C was visibly interested. Where he was asking questions all the time. You could see that his focus on everything around the parade, the organization, how meticulous the whole thing was, etc., was visible. And the fact that there were the Europeans that were in the square, they were the absolute minority in Europe, and they are considered outcasts in Europe. Fico from Slovakia and Vucic from Serbia. Obviously, nothing from the so-called European powers, absolutely nothing. Nothing from Brussels, obviously, because this is a discussion that I had while we were watching it and waiting to get on stage. I was at the RT stage, which was on the other side of the river, of the Moscow River. They mounted a spectacular studio with the view was incredible. And we were a small group of guests and we were intervening along the way. And in the end, they gave me an enormous honor, in fact, with George Galloway. We wrapped up the broadcast. Started with me, we switched to George in the square and came back to me. So it was up to George and myself to summarize what we have seen. It was an enormous responsibility. I was conscious that this was very, very, very serious. And I hope I did it. They liked it. The director said they liked it very much. And it was great because we had a point of view of a Scotsman, George, and the point of view of a Brazilian, South American, and a representative of the global South, in my case. So RT, of course, they are very, very conscious about all that as well. But the overall big picture theme about the parade, which was emphasized not only by interventions by President Putin for the past 2 days, by Sergei Lavrov, by Maria Zakharova, by Dmitry Medvedev, is that we won't allow Nazism and fascism to be back. We'll be on the front line fighting it. And this is exactly what we're doing today. Xi Jinping, after his meeting with Putin yesterday, said exactly the same thing in his own Chinese terminology. And the discussions that we were having at the RT studio, there was a first-class Russian military analyst. He's a double nationality. He's Russian American. Basically, we more or less, without, when we were on stage separately, we ended up saying basically the same, explaining the same concept. Now, some of the European elites whose lackeys and vassals are represented in Brussels, they are working seriously to establish a proto-Fourth Reich, which many of us qualify as liberal totalitarianism. So the liberal totalitarianism that we see coming from Brussels and imposed on the European capitals, this is the beginning of the Fourth Reich. And what could come later on is frightening, to say the least, for any EU citizen. Starting with the fact that they are represented in terms of foreign policy basically by two absolutely deranged women. And all of us who love women by definition are appalled that these women are representing their own, not only their own sex, but the foreign policy of 450 million people. I'm talking about the Medusa, and I'm talking about that Estonian idiot imbecile who cannot even manage a dog stand. Can you imagine the foreign policy of the whole European Union? Very dangerous. And the fact that there were no representatives apart from the outcasts, like I said before, it was another graphic proof. None of that, Nima, and all of you, escaped the attention of the global South representatives in the square. They have it very, very clearly. And the leadership role of Russia, side by side with China, and you could see that Putin was taking care of the most minute details to make his guest of honor absolutely at ease. And she was even smiling. The Chinese told me we never see she smiling in public, and in many occasions he was actually smiling. So he was pleased with everything. And what was leaked from their conversation, I would say, was only 10% of the whole thing. I was asking one of my Chinese colleagues from CGTN. He was there at the press conference. He said there were no questions allowed during the press conference. This is something that I know why. If they had opened for questions, this thing would have gone for 4 or 5 hours. And there was a lot of global media and media from the global south, essentially, with a few from the global north. And another reason is that certainly the Russians and the Chinese understood that the final words from both Xi and Putin and what was released to the media covered all aspects of it, and the rest they simply could not talk about live, which is part of their secret negotiations and conversations regarding how to build a new world out of the dark clouds surrounding us everywhere. So, in every respect, Nima and our audience, this was one of those historical moments that will stay forever.
Yeah. And we've learned that Russia and China condemned the United States missile defense plans in joint statement. And they're
Yes.
talking about the Golden Dome. And do you think that they're feeling that the United States is preparing for a war? That's why they're talking about this. That what's going on in the mind of Russians and Chinese right now in terms of Golden Dome?
They are not even paying too much attention, Nima, to tell you the truth. They are okay. It's like with hypersonics. The Americans are always announcing that they are testing a new hypersonic missile, and it's always a disaster. And in my conversation with this Russian military analyst, he confirmed with all of us already know the Americans are 3 generations behind in hypersonics compared to the Russians. So they will never catch up, whatever they do. So the same could be in terms of the Iron Dome, which, if we start to compare with the S-550, which is theoretically the newest Russian model, but something that we learned here in Moscow, and I learned this a few months ago, even last year, the S-600 is already designed and is going to be tested soon. And they're already working on the 7.7 or the S-700. So, in terms of the best missile defense on the planet, once again, the Russians are at least two generations ahead of the Americans. So the Russians are not very worried. And because of the strategic partnership, much of this information is, I'm not saying that they transfer directly. For instance, the latest missile defense, the Russians don't sell to the Chinese. They sell uh, the models immediately beforehand. But they talk about it, and obviously the Chinese will have access to some designs, for instance, to some creative solutions, as much as the Iranians had the opportunity to exchange ballistic missile information with the Russians. Something that we relearned last week. No, this how crazy that is. Today's Friday. Nima, I lost count of where I am. Can you believe that we were having this conversation about missiles this Monday this week with an IRGC general? Wow. Okay. So this is to give all of you how crazy our schedule can be sometimes, which is the case this past few days. So for the moment, they are especially because this week Putin and Xi were concentrated on their meeting face to face and in the enormous agenda of building the multipolar, multinodal world in detail, which is obviously much easier when discuss it live, right?
Yeah. Pepe, the case of Ukraine, Putin and she talk about the case of Ukraine. They believe that if there is something, a Ukrainian settlement, root causes of Ukrainian crisis must be addressed for lasting peace in
It's what
Ukraine.
the Russians have been saying since forever, right? Yes. Mm-hmm.
That it doesn't seem that would be considered in the eyes of Donald Trump. He tweeted, he posted on his social media that you have to negotiate on 30-day ceasefire or we're gonna put more sanctions on you. He's talking about Russians, by the way. And do you see Russia somehow trying to find a way to negotiate to somehow get along with the United States, or as time goes by we're seeing two parties are getting much more separated, much more divided than before?
It's the absolute opposite, Nima. The Americans know Trump because Trump, as we all know, he's not a strategist, so he changes his mind like he's using the remote. So how can you possibly trust a negotiate big power negotiator like this, who's not a strategist, who's not a diplomat, and who thinks that he runs everything, from being the next pope to being the ruler of the world? Always comes back to his out of control narcissism. It's like Trump looking at the pool and having this enormous reflection of himself as a giant, out of proportion Narcissus. It's impossible. The Russians and the Chinese, because they're rational actors, they are not impressed. The Russians, in terms of Ukraine, everybody here in a position of power knows very well. Stalling tactics, trying to get a ceasefire, imposing a ceasefire, trying to disguise a Minsk tree as a non-Minsk tree, when everybody knows that if this ceasefire happens, it's going to be a very, very lousy version of Minsk tree. So, and they have to go back to what they have been saying all the time. Look, if there's no solution, it will be decided in the battlefield. We are deciding this war in the battlefield. We are not in a hurry. The war will go on for the rest of 2025. Fine with us. It can go to 2026. We don't care. We'll keep advancing. And we'll stop when we decide we're going to stop. This is I would say, this is the uh, back to the bones Russian position. Straight up. No sauce, nothing. That's it. Take it or leave it. If the Americans, if the Trump 2.0 team would even think of a feasible ceasefire leading to a negotiation to end the war, which is something that the Russians say all the time, addressing the root causes of the war. But how can they possibly do it, Nima? Because they are the root cause of the war. It's absolutely impossible. We will have to backtrack not only to Maidan in 2014, the Victoria Nuland coup, but way before. We'll have to backtrack to the 90s. They won't do it. Superpowers, even in decline, they don't do this kind of thing. The Russians learn about their mistakes and learn about trusting the US. They don't trust anything coming from any silo of power in the US, be it a president or whatever, negotiator, whatever. They want to see facts. And for the moment, they were not offered any facts, solid facts. So this is the long-term Russian position, knowing that the war can go on for a long time. The Chinese, it took them at least, realistically, it took them at least 3 years to understand the real Russian reasoning. The Chinese know, once again, we had this conversation this week. It started in Iran already with very good Iranian analysts. The Chinese know that they're next. So they need to be behind Russia, because if Russia is in trouble, they know that they're next almost immediately. So the Chinese are not only learning from Russia's mistakes, challenges, and everything that the Russian army did right, but and at the same time, they rearranged conceptually how they see the war, and understanding why, for Putin 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, it was inevitable to launch the SMO. If he hadn't launched, we all know what would happen: a genocide in Donbass, to put it mildly. So he had to do it. The Chinese know that when their time comes, there will be a similar provocation, probably using Taiwan, whatever those ridiculous think tanks that know nothing about China concoct in Washington. So they're learning a lot about the process of the war in every aspect. And obviously, they were extremely impressed by how Russia fought the geoeconomic war and prevailed. So the interaction of this strategic partnership goes on many levels. It's not only exchanging information on hypersonic missiles. Is the Chinese carefully studying all the geoeconomic strategies and import substitution strategies that the Russians used, and made Russia the fourth biggest economy in the world by PPP. This impresses the Chinese a lot, because they are a big financial, economic, trade power. They are extremely impressed by it, as they are impressed by Russia military progress. And of course, what the parade demonstrated today, once again. So breaking it all down these past few weeks, a solidifying of the Russia-China strategic partnership and renewed self-confidence. If we read the details of what was leaked of the Putin-Xi conversation, this is the headline: two very self-confident, big powers, knowing that any change, substantial change in the system of international relations, they are the drivers. And that's exactly what Xi told Putin over 2 years ago here at the Kremlin, when Putin took Xi to his limousine in front of the Kremlin. The famous changes we have not seen in 100 years, and we are in the driver's seat. Yes, they are. And they proved again yesterday and today. So you can imagine, Nima, and all of you, how absolutely desperate they are in the West when they see something like this.
Is Russia concerned of the mineral deal between the United States and Ukraine? Because right after this deal, we see JD Vance talking about Russia asking too much, asking for too much. And it seems that it's not just about the Trump administration, it's about the future of Ukraine. How does Russia see the deal between the United States and Ukraine?
There's no definitive position, by the way, because they did not express a definitive position. They see this as a matter between the US and Ukraine. They have nothing to do with it. Of course, every good analyst here knows that these minerals don't even exist in Ukraine, and the ones that exist are in a
Even
minimal.
much more concerned.
So these are fictional minerals. They don't care. And in terms of rare earths, for instance, they know exactly what belongs to Russia in Donbass, very very well, and how much will it cost to start exploiting them. So this is a Russian matter. What Kiev and Washington strike, they don't care, and that's the right attitude. In fact, what is obvious for them is that the U.S. will continue to be deeply implicated in whatever remains of Ukraine, what we call rump Ukraine in the future. Um, Including, nobody knows what will include as well. So everything is fluid and open still, right? But it does not concern the Russian Federation.
I want to talk about Iran. You were in Iran this week, as you mentioned on Monday, and but before going to that, I think the case of Yemen is so much important. What has happened,
Wow. The
and
case and
what
you
has happened, Pep?
uh, wow, look, it's going to take some time for all of us to come up with the definitive catchphrase to encapsulate what happened. For the moment, there are several candidates. One of them is the biggest army in the history of the universe suffered an unquantifiable humiliation by Ansarallah, the Houthis, Yemen, so-called poorest nation in the Arab world. Poorest in terms of GDP per capita, because they have been sanctioned and harassed and attacked since forever, especially by the Saudis. This in itself is out. What they did with one single move, which is geopolitical, geoeconomic, and military at the same time. There was only one move subdivided. We run the Red Sea. Ah, yeah, you don't agree? Okay, come here and prove us wrong. Why we run the Red Sea means running ships going to Israel or support Israel, or under the framework that they established, that unless you finish with the genocide, there is some sort of ceasefire that you respect, etc., we will attack ships who are helping Israel. And because of that, the empire, without even thinking for 10 minutes, via that infamous signal conspiracy, including all the big wigs of Trump 2.0, in their own words, okay, let's start a war to give them a message. And the blowback of the message, wow. The blowback of the message was simply, okay, we can drown one of your $1 zillion aircraft carriers whenever we want. You continue to stay here, we can do it against you. And even worse, and we'll continue to attack your ships, not only Israeli ships or ships going to Israel. So in the end, it was the Americans who had to plead for a deal. Trump, of course, is the master of spinning. He said that the Houthis are tired, they're total nonsense. And everybody knows this, not only in the Arab world, but in the lands of Islam, in a great deal of the global south. The Americans were thoroughly humiliated. The president, his secretary of defense, and CENTCOM as a whole, because they don't have on the ground intel, which is something that all of us who visited all of us and our small group who visited Yemen last month, we could see on the ground and talking to members of the High Political Council. The Americans had less than zero intel on what Ansarallah has and where it is hidden or buried under mountains, whatever. So the humiliations is unquantifiable. And now, can you imagine? You have all these progressive guerrilla sovereign liberation movements, etc., all across the global south, looking at it, looking at what the Yemenis did, I said, wow, you can actually beat the empire at their own game. You just need to know how to strategize, and this Ansar Allah are masters. You need, of course, a streamlined fighting force with competent drones and ballistic missiles, and you have a shot, as the Yemenis proved it. So this is revolutionary in itself. Um, I learned a lot from my trip to Yemen, Nima. A lot. I was amazed by this intersection of spiritual guidance, political decision, moral clarity, a strength of spirit, and a very good implementation process. They are very well organized, considering that since they defined their final objective, you follow it and you adapt your strategy to it. But it's that moral clarity and that strength and that inner strength that is very, very important. Well, very, very few people or ethnic groups or tribes or have all these characteristics. So Ansarallah, the Houthis, and Yemen, considering the rich history of Yemen, they are a very particular case. But the lesson that the whole of the global south can take from all that is beyond precious.
Yeah. And we know that the is Yemeni attack on Ben Gurion airport was an important element to Donald Trump's decision on the operation in the Red Sea. And it was somehow surprising that the U.S. ambassador to Israel said they don't need a permission from Israel to talk to reach a deal with Yemen. And
Which is true, by the way.
yeah, but it's true. But you hear this from Mike Huckabee, and we know that how much he's pro-Israel. That was surprising to me.
They were, well, the word that I can use, I cannot use it here. They were beyond angry that, first of all, they were humiliated in front of the whole planet. Many reasons. One of them, misinformation or bad information or stupid information, which is the case of the CIA. CIA only provides stupid information for American presidents, irrelevant, outdated. The other thing is even worse, Nima, because it gets into Trump psychology 101. He felt that he was being used by the Israeli government. You can do anything with Trump except prove or suggest that he's being a puppet of somebody or some entity. He takes it extremely personally. So if we get these two motivations together, explains the Americans suing for peace. Let's put it the American way, of course, after bombing civilian infrastructure, after bombing civilian airport of Sana'a. It's as I learned the information from our friends on the ground, there's only one Yemeni Airways plane left. Everything else was destroyed. The control tower of the airport was destroyed. The main terminal, which is very, very small. When I arrived in Sun, I said, wow, this is not even an airport in a very small village in South America or in Africa. Now everything destroyed. And of course, yesterday the Yemenis were saying, we're starting to rebuild our airport again. You cannot break these people. I cannot believe there's one single idiot with a PhD from Yale or whatever, part of Trump 2.0 government, who can write a small paper and explain to the president who he's dealing with. No, there's not, obviously.
Pepe, here is what Mike Huckabee said in the same way that he was picturing the deal between Yemen and the United States. He said, if one of the 700 American citizens inside Israel is hurt by a Houthi attack, then we'll respond. Otherwise, we'll not. We have nothing to do with it. He simply says that if Yemen attacks Israel, we don't have anything to do with it.
They are more or less saying that, of course, with nuances, but this is the main message. Because of these two reasons that I explained to you 2 minutes ago. And this can all change tomorrow, Nima. We
No,
don't know. We don't know.
no.
Trump will never know what's going to change or not, or he's going to come up with another excuse, whatever, you know. But as it stands, this is what it looks like. And of course, they are still paying more attention to Ukraine because obviously his so-called peace plan is an absolute disaster. And of course, the blowback of the tariff war against China. So in these three fronts, they are losing them badly, badly. So it's a mix of lack of foresight, inexperience, total incompetence, plain stupidity, lack of decent advisors, all of the above. No wonder, no wonder. And the fact, of course, that the president doesn't listen to anybody except his own ego.
Yeah. How did you find Iran? And
Wow,
what?
this is yes, this is a long answer. This is a long answer. I was very impressed once again by the resilience, by the fighting spirit, by the quality of their intellectual analysis. We had a debate, a university debate, right at the beginning. I think it was last Sunday, with Sharmin and myself. Sharmin Narwani, editor of the Cradle in Beirut, where I am a columnist, and myself. And originally, the idea was to talk only about US Iran relations. But you know me, Nima, I am an anarchist. So after 10 minutes, I bombed the meeting. I said, no, we're going to discuss the big, big picture, which includes, of course, US Iran. But we're going to discuss the grand chessboard, and we're going to discuss the new great game. Obviously, they loved it, and the students the questions were ultra sharp. Loved it. So it was wonderful. It was a fabulous discussion. Geopolitics, the role of Iran, and then the next day I'm discussing Shiite theology. So that's the quality of intellectual life in Tehran. It's across the board and at a very, very high level. I'm sure many of you must have seen when we visited the IRGC Aerospace Museum. I introduced a little bomb in the middle of the whole thing because I saw a chance to ask a brigadier general of the IRGC the question about Operation True Promise 3. And his response was excellent. It's on X. It was retranslated. One of the Farsi-speaking reader of the guy who actually shot the video of myself talking to the general, she said, look, the translator by the official translator was horrible. And it was. And I could tell that it was not good, but it was what we had at the moment. And then she provided a very, I would say, faithful translation of a very nuanced response by Brigadier General Ali Balali. It was excellent, excellent. Basically saying, yes, everything is in place. There will be Operation True Promise 3 when we decide to launch it. So there will be a response. But obviously, for the IRGC, for Ayatollah Khamenei, they have to choose the right moment. And at the moment, or even this past 2 or 3 months, first they want to see if the Americans really want to start discussing the JCPOA. If Trump will continue to his threats to bomb Iran every week or so, how desperate are the Israelis? So it's a very complicated balancing act for the Iranian leadership. And the fact that this administration, as you know well, Nima, the Pezeshkian administration, it's complicated. This is a very complex discussion in Tehran. There are many people who don't agree with their position. They miss Raisi a lot because Raisi was a very determined guy and he would not bend over to anything coming from the West. He was not in favor of any accommodation with the West. And the Pezeshkian administration is the opposite. So this is an inter-Iranian matter. So for us foreigners, we get there, we listen to the discussions. It's fascinating, but they have to come up with a unified position. But many of the military-related experts or analysts, they know that sooner or later it will come to the crunch. And if something happens coming from Israel with US support, it's exactly what they said. We have everything in place. We're not impressed by whatever they do. And we have several degrees of responses depending on the scenario. So you sense, once again, self-confidence based on their technical capability, which is something that you see in the museum. The museum there, you have all those Shahid drones, different models, all their ballistic missiles, the latest Fatah, which is wow, super hardcore. So we said this is a serious military power, and if Israel tries anything stupid, they will be turned into a parking lot. No question about that. Iran has the means to do so. So this is one angle. The other angle is related to the domestic political situation, which is very volatile. I heard some rumors about who could be the possible successor to Ayatollah Khamenei, but I cannot talk about this for the moment. This is, I would say, relatively classified information. Economic situation is dire. A few numbers that I'm sure you know, Nima. They told me that you can have a full tank of gas for, in fact, I actually saw that. I was controlling one of the machines. When I look at that, I can't believe it. With 50 liters of gas, a full tank for many cars costs less than $2. Another friend told me that his monthly expense in water, electricity, fixed telephone line, etc., less than $2, sometimes $5. So the cost of living and the subventions from the state are, of course, very significant, but the salaries are very low. You never know the currency. It's a tsunami of zeros in you. Even if you're a local, you don't know exactly what you're dealing with, right? So this is very complicated, and the effects of sanctions. The good part is that in terms of import substitution, Iran manufactures practically everything that they need. That's a very positive point. But others, I'll give you a graphic example. I went to the Caspian, Tuesday, middle of this. Okay, two days ago, I was in the Caspian. Let's put it this way, because I was going to see the Iranian port in the international north-south transportation corridor, Russia, Iran, India. This would be the port where the cargoes from Astrakhan in Russia cross the Caspian, and the first port that they go is this port of Bandar Azali. So I arrive in Bandar Azali. Okay, we rent a boat to tour the port. So I am in the boat. I look around. I said, "Where's the port?" They say, "This is it." And frankly, Nima, there's practically nothing. The cranes are probably from the, I don't know, early 70s or mid 70s. There are very few. You look at the boats that were moored at the port, small boats from Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Russia. I saw only 4 or 5 boats for that matter, all of them small boats, essentially. So how can you have a transportation corridor where you're going to have those huge Russian cargo boats? They simply cannot land here. Out of the question. You have to build a port for them. So this is a very, very serious problem. And of course, right away you see why. Sanctions. Sanctions. It's very sad. Okay, you maybe the government was not successive governments were not paying too much attention to the Caspian. That's not the case, because there has been a very long negotiation among the 5 littoral Caspian states to establish the status of the Caspian and to improve trade among all of the 5 states: Iran, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Russia. So when I was even comparing with the other ports, I was comparing with Aktau in Kazakhstan, with Turkmenbashi in Turkmenistan, and with Baku. I've been to all these 3 in the past. The only one that I had not been before was Bandar Azali and Azali. I said, wow, how can you have this little thing here compared to the other Caspian ports, which are, wow, quite significant? So they have serious problems to solve. So this is one example to all of you of how sanctions can have the capacity to destroy the economy of a country. Very, very sad. Very sad.
Yeah. By the way, I know Anzali and the port of Anzali because
You've been to
yeah,
Azali
I've been there. Yeah.
a long time
And
ago or a few years ago?
long time ago, long
Ah,
time ago.
okay. It hasn't changed, Nima. Probably it's the same as it was when you went there.
Yeah.
No modernization whatsoever.
By the way, they didn't use it that much. I don't know. They didn't use the port that much.
Exactly, because they were not paying attention to the Caspian.
Yeah. Right now, the strategy is totally shifting, and that's why I think that in
Because,
the future we're
because
gonna
people
have.
are looking at, wow, we can have much more trade with, especially Kazakhstan, which is a medium power, and Russia and Azerbaijan, which has a very strong economy as well. But for that, you need to build a proper port. Bo, I'll get into details about this later on, because this is a good surprise. There will be a documentary about the North-South Transportation Corridor. I'm coming back
Mhm.
to Iran tomorrow night to work on this documentary, and then we explain on the spot what's happening. And obviously, the sequence in Bandar Azali would be quite worrying, because we show, look, there. If you want to build a proper transportation corridor, you have to do something now about this port.
But do you think that the new government, you mentioned the new president, the new administration in Iran, do you think that the people in Iran are feeling they are somehow mm, interested in what's going on between Russia and Iran, or they're less interested as we compare them with the Raisi's administration?
Yes, it's a good question. During Raisi was putting a lot of energy into accelerating the transportation corridor. And
Let me say the reason why I asked this question, because
yeah,
recently we had the meeting, the visit of Pezeshkian to Azerbaijan, in
mm,
which he tried to tighten the ties between Iran and Azerbaijan, which we know Azerbaijan is important in terms of this corridor. And go ahead.
absolutely, because Baku can be, let's say, a side road of the corridor, even if the corridor is essentially Russia, Iran, and then India. There will be more trade between Iran and Azerbaijan, of course, land and sea via Caspian. That's where the Caspian comes in again. But for that, you need a proper port. Baku, compared to Bandar Azali, is like Hong Kong or Shanghai. It's enormous. But now the emphasis is not so much on. I heard from very well informed people that they are dissatisfied with the foreign policy priorities of the Pezeshkian government. Very tricky subject, as you know, right, Nima? You don't discuss these things openly in Iran, but they say that there are too many Western centrics around Pezeshkian. They want some sort of accommodation with the West, no matter what. And this is the opposite of Rais's look east policy, right? So there is a conflict, no question about that. So, and we don't know how it's going to be resolved. What we expect is that with the strategic partnership Russia Iran, the Russians are going to step up their game as well and tell the Iranians, look, you need this in infrastructure, that, da, da, da. So you start profiting from the corridor as soon as possible. For instance, another example, but this is very important for our discussion. In the beginning of talking about the corridor, I had a series of interviews in Iran. And one of them was telling me that actually the Caspian was not the better idea. They will have to build a road on the left margin of the Caspian or use a road that a system of roads that already exist on the right side of the Caspian. When I got to Bandar Azali, I understood what they were saying. With that port, it's out of the question to use the Caspian. You need a road. One of them already, several of them already exist. And what do the Russians want to do? Build a road on the left side of the Caspian, and they even offer to give a loan with practically zero interest for Iran to build it. So when you put this into context, you understand. So the Russians are okay. Let's have this thing working soon, but we need infrastructure. Which is the quickest way? We'll build a road, or we'll give you what you need to build a road as fast as possible, because you cannot use the Caspian with this port that you don't have.
Mm.
Yeah.
In terms of the tensions in the Middle East, Pepe, do you see? You've mentioned that they're prepared for any sort of attack coming from Israel, but do they really believe that the United States would be part of that operation, or the, the common sense in Iran is somehow if they're gonna attack, it's gonna be just Israel without the United States or both of them together. What do they talk about these things?
Of course, nobody knows, Nima. So what they say is that they are prepared for all scenarios, which makes sense, without divulging secret classified information. Basically, what they say is, yes, whatever they come up with, we're ready. Which was the sense as well of the answer when I posed that question to the Brigadier General. This was inbuilt in his response as well. Which, yes, they are very good. The RGC at the highest level, they are very good planners. They are good at having a unified military strategy, and they are good at planning at the same time. So this was, we have to be particularly impressed when you see them. But there's another aspect that is also quite intriguing. It seems that because the country is under an existential threat, and there's no question about that, too much effort is around this sphere, the military sphere, and how to react to an attack. And at the same time, a certain fatalism of, yes, there will be an attack, and we have to know how to defend ourselves. So it's a very difficult position. But in every visit to Iran, I'm always extremely impressed by their resilience and their strength and their capacity to resist. It's extremely impressive. And this has to do, of course, with the Shiite view of the world.
Yeah.
No question. We had a we had a last minute discussion that was immensely important with how can I qualify him? He's a sort of informal advisor to very well positioned character in the Iranian media sphere. He's a Sufi, essentially, very spiritual, and at the same time, very practical. The guy is very good in information technology, for instance, at the same time. And we had a discussion that was immensely serious about Shiite theology, among other things, about the meaning of consciousness, about the search for oneness, which is a not so philosophical qualification of integration inside yourself, harmony within yourself, and harmony with the world. So then we go back to pre-Socratics, we go back to Zarathustra. Fascinating. So the level of conversation that you can have in Iran with informed people always astonished me, especially because now in the West, a dialogue like that or discussion like that practically doesn't exist anymore.
You've mentioned the situation of Bandar Anzali, as we call it in Persian.
Exactly. Bandar Anzali. Exactly.
Yeah. We know that the relationship between Iran and Russia has never been better than what it is today.
Mm,
That's why I think the future is totally different for that port.
mm.
And do you think that from what we've heard so far, do you think that Russia, how does Russia sees this project, North South corridor? Are they in the next 10 years, in the next 5 years? Because as you've mentioned, the situation in Bandar Anzali is not that much prepared for that.
No, no, exactly.
So how
Uh,
long does it take in the mind of Russians, in your opinion?
they want it as fast as possible because for the Russians, this is one of the definitive escapes of routes controlled by the West. And this is a BRICS only route with ramifications, but it can escape sanctions, interference, etc. So, from a Russian point of view, is essential. From an Iranian point of view, is also essential. But that's the difference between being under sanctions like the Russians for the past, most of them, the past 3 years, and okay, a few 10 years ago with Maidan, and Iran's being under sanctions for over 40. And you can see the degradation of infrastructure, not only in parts of Tehran, but in other cities as well. You feel it right away that is not a nation that is allowed to develop like the Emirates or Qatar, with unlimited funds, with help from the West, with Western investment, you name it, with mega capitalism or turbo capitalism driving everything. So Iran, they have to do it the hard way. And every modernization is indigenous modernization. Sometimes it takes very, very long time, and it doesn't cover everything. You feel there's no foreign investment in Iran.
Yeah.
You can actually feel it, you know. So this is very, very complicated. And now they have because of these strategic partnerships, they have a fabulous chance of having more Chinese investment, more Russian investment in specific areas, of course. One of them is transportation.
Even with India, we had a North
Even
South.
with India, exactly. But India, as you know, Nima, India is a mess.
Yeah.
So, especially now that they semi-manufactured this war against Pakistan, we don't know who provoked everything with this extremely dodgy terrorist attack. We have, of course, our ideas about who's behind it, What's very, very worrying as is that both Islamabad and Delhi fell for it. And they are doing exactly what this outside power wants them to do. It's terrifying how easy it is to manipulate. I wouldn't say big powers, but significant powers like Iran and Pakistan.
Yeah. Like India and Pakistan. Yeah.
Sorry, India, Pakistan. I'm so sorry. I haven't seen that for 3 days, Nima.
Muito obrigado, Pepe.
Muito
Grande
obrigado.
prazer, como sempre.
Thanks all of you. Sorry for me being. I'm going to try to sleep. Actually,
I am fascinated by you, Pepe.
Yeah,
You are.
I didn't have time to write. I couldn't write anything this week because it was non-stop action. Not to mention flight after flight, and then being on the road, and that continues this weekend. And then on Sunday, I'm already back on the road. You name it, you know.
You're gonna be back on Sunday.
It's great to see. This is a mini BRICS tour.
Yeah.
So you know, I was in China last month. This month in Russia and Iran, and by the end of the month, I'll be back in Russia as well. So it's a mini BRICS tour. So you have to. You're not allowed to sleep. You have to go deep, 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 deep everywhere in different dossiers, compare stuff. You know, but that's it. That's how it works.
Yeah. Obrigado, Pepe.
Thank you.
Te vejo.
Obrigado. Grande abraço.
Grande abraço.
Não se esqueça, no passarão.
Obrigado.
Bye bye.
Se cuide. Bye.